Hello, YouTube friends. Jamie Hepworth here, and today I'm going to read First Nephi chapter 5 and chapter 6 with you, or discuss it anyways. I'm not going to read everything in there, but chapter 6 is short, so I'm just going to combine it in the study, and I invite you to follow along in your own scriptures. I will post a link to these chapters in the show notes below. So chapter 5, we see quite a bit of Sariah. Women are not really talked about in the scriptures very often, but in this chapter, we learn more about her. We know that she's really, really glad that her boys made it back safely. She was extremely worried about them and was crying and complaining to Lehi. It makes me laugh a little bit that she's complaining to him about being a visionary man, and then the way that Lehi responds, like, I always kind of wonder what the tone of voice is when he's responding. It sounds like really practical, but definitely not offended. I mean, she's saying, yeah, you're like a visionary man, and you're getting us to leave our lands of inheritance, and our sons are no more, and we're going to die too. And he says, yea, like, I know that I am a visionary man, for if I had not seen the things of God in a vision, I should not have known the goodness of God, but had tarried in Jerusalem and had perished with my brethren. So I think that I appreciate the fact that Lehi's level-headedness can be stabilizing to Sariah in this moment. I mean, I can't really imagine a more painful thing than to give up literally everything and to know that it came to naught. Jordan Peterson, I enjoy following his content, and I have for several years. And I remember one time that he talked about Mary holding Jesus, after he had been crucified, and like there was some painting or statue or something that he was referring to. But he said basically that that's what every woman does, is that she brings her child into this world, and just knowing that her children will die eventually. And I think that's kind of the ultimate terror for women. It's our ultimate hope that our children will do well and grow and progress, and we can continue. And so this thought of death is like the end of everything that means something to her, the death of her sons. And so, but I like the way that Lehi is holding down the fort here and just saying, no, I did see a vision, and I know God's good, and we're not going to die, and this is all going to be okay. I think verse 5 is very insightful, and it's an important one because there's a lot of meat in this sentence here. He says, but behold, I have obtained a land of promise, in the which things I do rejoice, yea, and I know that the Lord will deliver my sons out of the hands of Laban and bring them down again unto us in the wilderness. And so it says that this is how Lehi comforted Sariah while they were gone. And he said, no, I know that everything's going to be fine. You're going to be okay. I love this relationship. I love the leadership that Lehi is expressing. I love that Sariah can be vulnerable with him in a worried moment, and he doesn't take offense. Like, I think this is a great example of a couple who are able to live lovingly with each other. And like the true prophetic person that he is, we see that when her sons return, when Lehi and Sariah's sons return, says their joy was full and my mother was comforted. And I think, like, this is the essence of what it means to experience Zion, to be happy, to have all the things that matter, is to have family who are able to be together and alive and joyful together. And that is the comfort to mother's heart. If there's any indication, I've talked about this on my YouTube channel and other videos before, but I've really been thinking about it the last couple of years, that the essence of true religion is to comfort the widows and the fatherless. And it's to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. Strengthening the bonds in the family and in the human family are what religion's really about. And it's so that we can be together and alive and present for each other. And I mean, in this case, it's mostly just that like they survived this crazy situation, and we know that their family dynamics are more complicated. But I think this little phrase here, their joy was full, is sweet, especially when we consider the scriptures and other quotes from prophets that talk about what does it mean to enjoy a fullness of priesthood power. Family unity is one of those things. But verse 5, I kind of skipped over that. Lehi says, I have obtained a land of promise. This is a hefty thing that he has just said. He's actually talking about, not about arriving in some other physical land, but he's talking about how his calling and election has been made sure. He has come into the presence of God. He has come to the presence of Christ, and Christ has told him that everything is going to be secure for him eternally. That's what that means. And so, I mean, this is only chapter 5 in the Book of Mormon. We'll see a little bit later in this chapter that Lehi starts to prophesy, and it says, anyway, so already in this book, we've seen Lehi prophesying. We're seeing the importance of the scriptures. We're seeing angels appear. We're seeing dreams. We're seeing visions. We're seeing miraculous happenings. This is a book that definitely testifies that God has that there are connections to otherworldly sort of experiences that can happen when we're living lives in the way that God would have us live. And I appreciate that. And I mean, obviously, also, he's not only does Lehi have dreams and visions, he says that he's seen Jesus, right? And he's receiving messages from him. And he says here, I've obtained a land of promise. There's some like hefty doctrines that are coming out in just these few chapters. And already, like, the scriptures have taught us the pattern, and we see that pattern of how to obtain these wonderful things that Lehi knows about in verse 8, actually verse 9. So it says here, and it came to pass that they did rejoice exceedingly and did offer sacrifice and burnt offerings unto the Lord, and they gave thanks unto the God of Israel. We see this principle of sacrifice over and over and over again, and gratitude for God over and over and over again. And when everyone is willing to make sacrifices for God and to be grateful for God, we see that things go more smoothly for them when they give credit to God where it's due, and wherever they I want to push against that and to complain about the discomfort of the moment, things do not go as well. I think verse 8 is an important verse when we're thinking about how is it that we can really know who we're following and if this is a true prophet. What does it say in verse 8? Sariah speaks, in this moment of having full joy. And she says, now I know of a surety that the Lord hath commanded my husband to flee into the wilderness. Yea, and I also know of a surety that the Lord hath protected my sons and delivered them out of the hands of Laban, and given them power whereby they could accomplish the thing which the Lord hath commanded them. And after this manner of language did she speak. And then she's wanting to offer burnt sacrifices and burnt offerings. Okay. She knows of a surety that the things her husband spoke were true because they came to pass. And she saw good fruit that brought her the the great joy, the fullness of joy that comes from feeling the Spirit, and that she was told something would happen, and it did happen in that way. So I've been thinking a little bit, this is going to be later down the line when I get to Alma 32, but it's important to know how we can investigate spiritual things. We can experiment on the word by actually living it and doing it, and then seeing what the fruit is that comes about. There are principles and commandments that we're taught to do, but there are also things that we're asked of God to do. And like I mentioned in the other video, I think it was yesterday or the day before. And the idea is, if you get a little journal and you write down the promptings that you get from God and you follow them, you'll start to see evidence of fruit. Like in this case, Sariah and Lehi, like God asked them to do something really, really big and really drastic. And she hadn't quite seen the fruit until her sons came back to know that things were going to be okay. But this was an evidence for her. It was fruit that they were actually instructed by God to do this, and that they were being led, and that things were going well. So I think if we do that with smaller things, we'll be able to see that with bigger things. And sometimes we have experiences in life where we do what God tells us to do, and then we have painful experiences too. And do I want to talk about that today? I don't know if today is the day to talk about it, but I have had experiences like that where I thought that, I was doing what God asked me to do, and then I had something really difficult happen. That's happened many times, but I will say that if I hold out faithful and I continue to believe in the goodness of God, in every single circumstance where that's happened, I have seen how God was working something out for my good, and I just needed to be patient a little bit longer to be able to see and understand it. Sometimes it took years to better understand situations like that. But something that I do know about Sariah from these verses, after she gets this evidence that her husband really is led by God and that things are okay, and like they've been able to accomplish this sort of impossible thing, she never complains again. We don't ever see any verses that talk about Sariah complaining to her husband. And we do see later, in just a few chapters later, that she is seen eating the fruit of the tree of life with Lehi. So I think Sariah is a righteous woman, and she's also human who worries about her kids, because that's her job, is to love and care and take care of her family. So she's a good mama too. And I think in our world of like cheap interactions and cheap religious experience, like we just kind of want everything by takeout, just like, I'll just get that in the drive-through. And to really contemplate like what Sariah was giving up to follow her husband's instruction and counsel. Like, hopefully this dude wasn't crazy, and he wasn't. He was inspired. And I feel relieved with her as I read verse 8. All right, so it says that like after they had given thanks together to the God of Israel, Lehi takes the records out, and he's right on it to start searching them and reading them. And they find that the scriptures contain the books of Moses and the creation of the world and of Adam and Eve, and it contains the record of the Jews from the beginning. Interestingly too, and it talks about, there are a lot of prophecies from holy prophets from the beginning, including some by Jeremiah, who I believe was a contemporary, anyways, of Lehi. Is that like the latest stuff? I don't know. I'm not really a scriptorian in the deepest sense, so please forgive me for any mistakes I make. If I make a mistake, feel free to correct me in the comments section, and I hope that you'll contribute thoughts and insights that you're having. My goal is to look for spiritual principles that teach kind of the point of the scriptures. So I do think it's interesting that they see a record of the genealogy of of Lehi's fathers, and that he finds out that they're a descendant of Joseph, right? Who is the son of Jacob, who was sold into Egypt, who is preserved by the hand of the Lord, that he might preserve his father Jacob and all his household from perishing with famine. The story of Joseph is one of the most powerful allegories of Jesus Christ that I've ever seen, but I think it also illustrates the journey that people take when they are covenanted, like when they have obtained special favor with God. Like they really do follow sort of like the hero's journey, where there's a great descent into difficulty, and it's through overcoming that and through trusting the gifts of God to help them that they're able to overcome those things. I think it's interesting too that he mentions later that Laban is also a descendant of Joseph. That's why he had kept the records. There's this sort of shout out again to this idea that there is sort of whoever's supposed to have these things by the birthright, but it gets passed on to somebody else because of unfaithfulness. That's a continual theme we'll see again and again. All right. It says, now when my father saw these things, he was filled with the Spirit, and he began to prophesy concerning his seed. And it says in verse 18 that these plates of brass should go forth unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people who were of his seed. And wherefore he said that these plates of brass should never perish, neither should they be dimmed any more by time. And he prophesied many things concerning his seed. He saw this modern day age. Like the book of the Bible is the most popular selling book of all time, the most widely distributed book of all time. He didn't know all the ways that this could be written in many languages and brought forth to all nations, but he saw it. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of amazing things that had to happen in order for that prophecy to be fulfilled, but this is a really wonderful prophecy in the Book of Mormon. It says, and it came to pass that that thus far I and my father had kept the commandments wherewith the Lord had commanded us, and we had obtained the records which the Lord commanded us, and searched them, and found that they were desirable, yea, even of great worth unto us, insomuch that we could preserve the commandments of the Lord unto our children. The goal of having scriptures, like the important thing about the scriptures, is to preserve the commandments of God for our children. And when we think about that, you know, like when we're reading scriptures, is it about, with our children, is it about figuring out the storyline? Is it about understanding like what's the goal? Like, how do we understand the commandments of God? Like, what constitute the commandments of God? I think that's, you know, Jesus summed it up into two great principles, basically, that it's the commandments are to love God and to love others as yourself. But in the context of a society that's going to be rebuilding itself in the wilderness in a new location, that they can't do that unless they have an understanding of the ways of interacting and what God wants. Like a land of promise is not going to be a land of promise without people who actually know what it means to live together in love and harmony, right? It's not just having a place to dwell, but it's having people who love and care for each other in God's way that make the commandments great and make them worth preserving and teaching to our children. It says, wherefore it was wisdom in the Lord that we should carry them with us as we journeyed in the wilderness towards the land of promise. We see in chapter 6 that Nephi is giving some more insight about this topic of, you know, the importance of the scriptures and what the purposes are for, and that he knows also, he's giving some instruction to his own future family members to be careful about the kinds of things that they take the time to write about on these plates. He says, I do not give the genealogy of my fathers in this part of my record, neither at any time shall I give it after upon these plates which I am writing, for it is given in the record which has been kept by my father, which we know was lost with the 116-page incident. So we do not have that information. He says, wherefore I do not write it in this work, for it sufficeth me to say that we are descendants of Joseph. So that's like all that we understand about Lehi and Nephi's family line, that they are somewhere in there, they're related to Joseph. It says, it mattereth not to me that I am particular to give a full account of all the things of my father, for they cannot be written upon these plates, for I desire the room that I may write of the things of God. So what he's saying is his focus is to write the things of God. He says, the fullness of mine intent is that I may persuade men to come unto the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob and be saved. That's his goal. That's his whole goal. That's the goal of the Book of Mormon. That is the goal of the Bible. That's the goal of the Jews. This is the goal. It says, wherefore the things which are pleasing unto the world I do not write, but the things which are pleasing unto God and unto those who are not of the world. Wherefore I shall give commandment unto my seed that they shall not occupy these plates with things which are not of worth unto the children of men. So he's distinguishing the difference between what is pleasing to God and but not to the world. And he's speaking to those who are not of the world. Like, who are those who have sacrificed enough to go into the wilderness to really pay the price to know God and to start to see the fruits of that until they can know with a surety that they have obtained a land of promise. That is who Nephi is talking to. That's what he's persuading people to experience for themselves. That is the goal of the Book of Mormon. Oh, I'm going to post in the comment section below an article on calling an election made sure, because I think that might be helpful. And I'm going to post I'm going to post in the section below a quote from Joseph Smith from page 150 to 151 in Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. I don't have those with me, but I'm just thinking that those would be helpful things. Like, these show us like the full process, I guess, in just a few short paragraphs, what it means to obtain a land of promise. And I'm going to go ahead and post that below. But I think it's interesting that Nephi is establishing here what is important to talk about and what he wants all of his people to talk about. And so that tells us a lot about the intent of this entire book of scripture. It's about teaching the commandments, preserving those for future generations, and persuading everybody to come unto the one true God. Thank you for your time. I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. Have a great night. Bye.